Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groome, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy.
Hey, welcome everybody to this episode of the Creative Operations Podcast 2.0. I'm very pleased today to be speaking with Yari Ising. She's the founder and the head of the Icing Agency. And what's really great about this is these guys make sort of the central mission in life to support in-house agency teams. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about the human factor. We've talked a lot in previous episodes about technology and workflows and et cetera, but really focusing on the human factor and what makes in-house agencies get up in the morning and what sometimes makes them gnash their teeth a little bit is what we wanted to talk about. But before we dive into that, Yari, first, thank you for joining us. And second, tell us a little bit about how you got into this creative operations gig in the first place.
Yeah, well, first, let me say thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. And creative operations is my bread and butter and what I get most excited about. It seems a little nerdy to a lot of people, but making sure that teams are efficient and happy and healthy are things that I really kind of strive for every day. So I'm really excited to be talking about this. And yeah, so to answer your question really quickly, I started working in event production and in television production, and then eventually my career progressed into doing some media staffing and working with Fortune 500 companies all around the world. So I've gotten the unique experience to be able to see a lot of different teams, how they operate and what works for them and what doesn't. And I've also built my own internal, my own internal team. So, it's kind of a fun kind of industry to be in, I guess.
Yeah. And so, a little background, just, for the context on my next question. I have spent a lot of time, several decades in and around creative operations, and I've seen the nature of the term really evolving. Back in the day, right, when broadcast TV and broadcast buys were the dominating factor of production, creative operations was really about how to get that commercial, that $750,000, production budget down to $600,000 or $500,000, et cetera. Today, creative operations has taken on so many different aspects of content creation. And in fact, the word content, which we've always been in that business, right, is really a word that has now become both ubiquitous and a little bit vague. So I wanted to ask you, as you think about consulting with agencies, how has the mission for you evolved over time? Are you changing with, the changing sort of media mix, or do you really find that still the stock in trade is that broadcast TV spot, or has it gotten much more complex than that?
Yeah, I think about creative ops and creative ops managers and people in leadership in that world as really being a Swiss Army knife, right? Where they have their hand in every part of the production from start to finish, from intake to delivery. Mm-hmm. And I like to consider, the fact that when we look at creative ops, I always look at the people aspect of it. So making sure that everything that you do from start to finish is as effective and as productive as possible to get us to that final deliverable. So yeah, I think as you very aptly mentioned, specifically in-house work has definitely evolved with in-house agencies. Back in 2013 when I started, when I became familiar with in-house agencies and started working with them, only about 58% of big brands said that they even had an in-house agency, right? And so now here we are, fast forward 2022. I was recently at the Association of National Advertisers in-house agency conference down in Orlando, and now that number's up to 82%, right? Yep. And so of that 82% of brands that are saying that they have an in-house agency, 88% are saying that their workload has increased over time. So I think it's inevitable that creative operations in general just is going to change and evolve. And I think the more emphasis is being put on the actual process building and the actual evolution of automation and things like that within, again, the in-house agency model, because that's the example that I always fall back on, because that's the world that, I've been living in for the past decade.
Yeah. So before we dive into sort of the platform and the workflow stuff, let me focus a little bit on the human factor. And you mentioned that the workload is increasing, and we see that everywhere, right? In the do more with less. Yep. Do more in less time as well. So not just fewer dollars, but fewer days or hours in the schedule. And one of the classic raps on creative operations back in the day was that they were the budget cutters. They were the green eye shades people who were coming in, just to slash the budget and find, hey, you said you were going to spend, $1,500 on stock footage. You're going to spend $750 on stock footage, or whatever it might be. Yeah. Do you think creative operations has really begun to take on more of the mantle of, hey, we're engineering a process and a workflow that's not just going to work for this project, but that's going to work for this team for the long haul? Is that more what your assignments are about these days?
Yeah, I think there are, times where people use the terms like creative ops management and project management kind of synonymously. Yeah. I think we can both understand and see, because we live in this world, that, project management is just that. It's specific to a project and making sure that everything runs smoothly. But when we look at it from a creative ops standpoint, it's taking a strategic look overall to solve for not just today's problems and productivity, but to solve for the long term. Where do we want to be in, 5-10 years from now when our team has multiplied exponentially? What systems can we put in place and things like that to make sure that our people are taken care of? Because that's like, as you mentioned, that's the people aspect of the work that I do is super important, because, if you have all these duct taped solutions put together because you're kind of building as your team grows without thinking bigger picture, one, you're not getting the cost savings that you think that you're getting. And two, you're also not thinking about the future team members that you're going to be overwhelming, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. No, one of the phrases, Sarah and I, that's our marketing person for all those folks who I haven't mentioned it to before, and she does a fantastic job. But one of the things we talk about a lot, the phrase that rolls off everybody's tongue when we're talking about Pike & Iron solutions and broader topics, is one-off design requests. Mm-hmm. These things that come in from the field, whatever the field might happen to be, franchisees, resellers, dealers, salespeople. Sometimes salespeople come up with the most complex and shortest cycle turnaround tasks and requests. But one-off design requests seems to be what everybody has in common. Mm-hmm. And so, what I was wondering about as I was listening to you describing the evolution of creative operations into a more strategic function is there comes a time in most in-house agencies' life where they kind of reach a breaking point. And very often one of the straws in the camel's back is those one-off design requests. Mm-hmm. Do you see that with this, with the proliferation of media types? Is it still that stuff is still flooding in from the field, unscheduled work that's constantly competing with the strategic and the calm, productive culture you're trying to create?
Yeah, and I can speak to my own in-house team that I've built from the ground up over the course of 3 years. That is definitely a challenge in that you're working on the strategic messaging and you're working on the work that is planned, like you've just described, and having these one-off requests and changes that need to be made that are just, this is going to be super quick, but inevitably it disrupts the workflow of the person that's that's already working on something that is at, on level, I don't know, at a top tier. It's super distracting, and it does impact the human capital and the resources that that you're allocating. So that it's something that I think all in-house agencies kind of struggle with, and something that, it's, I think, with technology and automation, it helps kind of move things along. So that's why these tech tools exist. As long as they're strategic and we're not just, onboarding new technologies and softwares that, folks aren't bought into or haven't been strategically implemented, they have the possibility of making things so much faster and better for folks.
Yep. I was wondering, as you were describing the growth of your team, and I'd love to hear more about that, because it sounds like you guys are becoming sort of an extension of the clients, not just creating the strategy, but also being there when the crunch time comes. Is it like that for you guys? You both set up systems and processes and you run within them as well?
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a separate kind of scenario. I actually work with another unit that's a kind of separate from my my agency, the Icing Agency. So I'm the engagement director for a unit. So I'm working that. And so I have a team of about 13 folks that do all of the external facing, creative events and things like that.
Okay.
So I'm a pretty busy gal. But it is something that I do, at the Icing Agency. I see myself as a partner for my clients, because, when I'm being brought in, it's because they have a problem that either they're too overextended to solve, or they just need an outsider's point of view, right? For example, I had a client who got an influx of their own clients, right? And they're working to get, all the work out the door and the deliverables out the door, that they they didn't have a process set up for how they're going to bill for this. So my team and I came in and kind of helped take care of the backlog of the billing part of it, so that they can focus on building sustainable long-term, that this is the volume of work that you're going to get from here on out. So let's prepare for that and build SOPs and kind of build those workflows and automations, so that I will take all the grunt work off of your plate so that you can focus long term. And so that's an example of the things that kind of excite me as a creative ops nerd, and making sure that people have the ability and the flexibility and the time to be able to allocate resources appropriately, so that I can take things off their plate. But yes, I also have this other aspect of the work that I do, where I run the in-house agency for an Air Force unit.
Oh, that's so fascinating. And it also gives you a laboratory, right, where you can really sort of fine-tune theory and really look at it in the real world. One thing I wanted to mention, for a couple of years now, I've been championing this very simple idea, I guess, but it's funny how hard it is to get it to stick. And it goes something like this. You take a typical request that comes in from the field, and to the person requesting it, it looks simple. But when you really assess the number of hands and minds that touch that piece of work, by the time it returns fully ready to be used in the marketplace, it almost always creates kind of an aha moment for that initial requester. But that initial requester, and this is one of the central problems, at least I've seen in the past, 10 or 15 years, I guess, with Pike & Nine customers, the initial requester almost never sees all those touches, never knows how the sausage was made, and so never really develops a sensitivity for the impact she or he is having on, that team that they're asking something of. And here's when we speak about the intangibles, in-house agencies for years have had to fight for a little bit of respect, against the externals. And if you are constantly mired in one-off design requests, you never really get to show your creative chops, because you're constantly putting out fires that people don't appreciate are complex projects in and of themselves. So I had a suggestion for you, or actually it might even be a request, but also a question. That my request was, I've been working on a calculator to see if I could figure out how to make plain the number of touches. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to, work with us a little bit and use it a couple times and tell us if it gives you numbers that make sense. And then here's my question. Absent anything like that, how do you socialize what's going on inside the agency so that all of its customers understand what they're asking for? Because they're not in traditional commercial relationships where they just pay a freight. They're actually working with their partners, with their colleagues, their coworkers. And so they don't see it in that classic commercial sense. So how do you overcome that so they develop that sensitivity?
I think it comes down to over communication and documentation. I am very vocal with folks, and I encourage my teams to be very vocal and transparent about, hey, if you're asking for this, this is how long it's going to take because I'm working on this priority project, and you kind of manage expectations up front so that they can understand that, hey, if this can wait, then that would be preferable. But I find that you often aren't given a chance because enough time has passed to where it's now become an emergency before it's even hit your desk. And so I think, depending on the situation and depending on the scenario that we're talking about and who we're talking about, sometimes we do have to drop everything and get the job done. But I find that over communication over the long term has been amazing for myself and my team.
I love that. I love the notion of over communicating about things, both in syllables and sometimes in phone time, in FaceTime, which is hard to get in today's virtual world. But developing that human empathy, I think, is a great way for folks to understand how their particular request was fulfilled. So I'm writing that one down. So let me just turn for a second to this notion of, you're trying to build a culture, and you can't say necessarily no when the rubber is really meeting the road and senior leadership is asking for it. So in those situations, how do you help the team not find itself sliding back into old sort of chaotic workflows? How do you hold the line but still answer the request? How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about is, like you said, there are going to be scenarios and times where we really don't have a choice, right? Yeah. But I think in making sure that the team is taken care of in the times where you do have a choice, I think is super important.
Oh, that's great.
I'll give you an example. I have a rule on my team that if you're in a meeting and you don't feel like you can add value and you're like, what the heck am I even doing here in this meeting? Just leave. And there you go. You've got an hour of your time back. And so being not only over communicative to your clients and your stakeholders, but also to your own team and embodying those things like, hey, if I'm on vacation, don't call me, don't text me, talk to so-and-so, they'll take care of you. So making sure that they understand that they are taken care of will help build a little bit more of I want to say, it kind of excites people to be able to help when they have the opportunity to, because they don't have to go to 1,000 meetings or if there's no purpose for a meeting, if I have a 45-minute meeting scheduled, which I never go beyond 45 minutes, I try not to.
Another good rule.
Yeah, so that folks have a buffer time to prepare for the next one if they need to, or just get a breath of air.
Breathe. Yeah.
So, if they know that they're being taken care of and I'm not requesting something from them or requiring them to do something that I wouldn't do myself, then, that kind of helps to kind of keep the energy high on my teams.
It sounds to me, and it makes me think of the military too, on duty, off duty, having the ability to be on duty and knowing that you're on duty. I love when teammates feel like they're at their post and ready to respond. But I also know, and I've seen this with creative teams. Creative teams these days are becoming more and more like development teams. Mm-hmm. You've got to insulate them so that they can get into a flow and they can really dive deep, whether they're writing a blog post or they're, developing a social media video, or they're developing a broadcast spot, you got to give them the time to go deep without distractions. But at the same time, this notion that I'm on duty or off duty, and separating those two things, because otherwise it will never end. It seems like the need is always there. And then the third point that occurred to me as I was listening to you was just leadership. The notion that you set boundaries and maintain them, and that you're willing, like any good platoon leader, to go wherever the platoon has to go, right with them. That to me also speaks to a culture that is probably healthy over the long haul. Let me ask you a couple lightning round questions, okay? Just as we, all right. First one, top 3 technologies you think creative operations needs to be thinking about in the next 3 years. Is it AI? Is it DAM? Whatever. What do you think are the top 3 you'll be thinking about layering in? Being careful and change management and all, but thinking about it.
Sure. I'm a huge believer in SOP software, SOP building software. I use Notion in my own team, and I really look forward to seeing what the next level looks like, how that evolves over time, and how it can how we can kind of integrate a little bit more. Integrate a little bit more softwares and things like that into Notion, and automate some things. I think AI is one that is very heavily discussed right now from a content creation and actual content production standpoint. I can't speak intelligently to it because, obviously there are regulations that we have to take into account in the future, and copyright issues and things like that. But I'm really looking forward to process and automation, support. There will always be a human aspect to the work that we do. And I think AI is going to be a great opportunity to enhance that human touch and the human centeredness. But as for content creation, I'm waiting around like everyone else to see, what comes of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think my third thing is generally where tech stacks are going in the future. Where technology will be able to take us in the future. So I don't have anything specific for the last point, and that's open-ended on purpose, because I think that there are technologies and things that we haven't even started to think about that will come in and take over.
That's great. So last one, and that was perfect that you left the third one open. I really love that, because AI. I was just reading a blog post I wrote in November, and AI had really just in November burst upon the world. And now it feels to me like it's the flavor of the day every day, all day long, And so if that's the pace of change, that is something to digest. But my last question goes to a little bit more timeless stuff, so there's kids coming out of, I shouldn't say kids, young people. Coming out of schools, entering careers, headed toward, whether they know it or not. One of the things we've often heard about creative operations is it's a field that finds you rather than you finding it very often. But let's say that someone was headed toward and knowingly headed toward creative ops. What are the sort of mindsets that you think would make them most comfortable and happiest in creative operations? What do they need to bring to the table? Not the technology skill sets, but the softer side that they need to bring to today's kind of creative operations, as opposed to what we used to know of it back 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it will always come back to being human centered, right? I feel like a lot of people get so caught up with the technology and, what this technology can do versus this one, and how many different benefits you can get from, integrating this into that. And I think what would make a good creative ops manager and a good leader over time, is going to be really thinking about the human aspect and not just chasing the next shiny thing. And it's kind of, I feel like some folks might think that it's counterintuitive because you're supposed to be finding the most efficient thing possible. But without thinking about the people behind the work, you're not taking care of the whole person. And if you're not doing that, no one's going to adopt that software. No one is going to want to go to the meetings where you have something really important to say, or, having that just general interest in other people and what they can also bring into your role is so important. So I'm a huge believer in taking care of your people.
That was beautiful. Because I think we often talk about technology as a force multiplier, but if there's nobody to multiply, it has no value. And so this notion that a field as quote unquote techie, as creative operations has become, should actually begin with a focus on the artist. Because almost everybody that we're trying to serve and support started out, at least in ambition and aspiration wise, as somebody with an artistic bent. Those are folks we're trying to serve. Back in my day as an agency leader, I often said, my creatives were the folks I had to insulate, I had to protect, I had to really, allow to find the thing that would be the $1 million idea, the $10 million idea. And all the work that we do around that is just to prepare the soil for that idea to grow. And it's just the same thing going on today. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. I'm going to bring it to a close just because we try to keep ourselves around 20. We could go on all day, and I hope you'll come back and join us. In a year's time, I'm going to ask you that question, AI, friend or foe, and I'll bet you're going to have a better answer than we have today. So thank you, Yari, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate your time, and this was really fun. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay, everybody, look for us on the next episode of the Creative Operations Podcast 2.0. See you soon.